Now, a new analysis shows that the 6-ton iconic altar stone at the heart of Stonehenge originated from northeastern Scotland rather than southwest Wales. The discovery shows that its construction was a far greater collaborative effort than scientists believe. Here's our science correspondent, Palab Ghosh.
They scanned beneath Stonehenge and immediately wished they hadn't. What the Lidar cameras found buried underground is so deeply unsettling that several scientists on the team refused to go on record. A hidden structure so massive, so impossibly precise, that it shatters everything archaeology ever told you about this place. Experts are calling it the most disturbing discovery in modern history.
You're a proud Welshman and you've taken the Welsh status away from the stone. So how do you think it'll go down in Wales?
Yeah, I'm not sure they'll ever talk to me again. It's a loss for Wales, no doubt, but Wales has contributed so many rocks to this monument, I'm sure Scotland can have one.
And the governments who funded this research, they tried to bury it. What is down there was never supposed to be found. And now that it has been, nothing about Stonehenge will ever look the same again. In the summer of 2023, a research team fed decades worth of data into an artificial intelligence system. Every excavation report ever filed at Stonehenge, every acoustic measurement ever recorded, every geological survey, every astronomical alignment. Thousands of individual data points collected over more than a century of scientific work, all processed together for the first time. The team expected the system to confirm what archaeologists had long suspected. What they got instead was something none of them had anticipated. When the results came back, acoustical engineer Trevor Cox from the University of Salford went quiet. His colleague, musicologist Rupert Till from the University of Huddersfield, read the output twice and asked whether the system had produced an error. It had not. The AI had reached a conclusion that forced the team to rethink something they believed was already well understood. Stonehenge, one of the most studied monuments on Earth, had been misclassified. Not as a temple, not as a calendar, as something else entirely. To understand what the AI actually found, it helps to go back to the beginning. Most people picture Stonehenge as a fixed, finished thing. The image is familiar enough, a circle of massive standing stones on an open plain in Wiltshire, England. But that picture is misleading. The monument we see today is the result of at least 3 major phases of construction spread across roughly 1,500 years, beginning somewhere around 3000 BC. The earliest version was little more than a circular ditch in the ground with timber posts. Over the following centuries, the site was repeatedly modified. Stones were moved, repositioned, and in some cases removed entirely. The structure was not built once. It was rebuilt again and again by successive generations who inherited a project they had not started and would not live to finish. By the time the final phase was complete, Stonehenge consisted of 2 types of stone arranged in a series of concentric shapes. The larger stones, known as sarsens, weigh up to 25 tons and came from Marlborough Downs, roughly 25 miles to the north. The smaller ones, referred to as blue stones, weigh between 2 and 5 tons and were brought from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales, a distance of approximately 150 miles. The effort involved in moving any of these stones using the technology available at the time was extraordinary. The reasons behind those choices, however, were not fully understood until the AI began processing the complete data set. What the system flagged was not the size of the stones or their arrangement, it was their property. Specifically, the acoustic, magnetic, and resonant characteristics of the individual rocks. According to the AI's analysis, the stones were not selected for their appearance or for any symbolic meaning. They were selected for what they could do when placed together inside a closed, circular structure. And when the system modeled how those properties interacted with each other, the output suggested that the end result was not accidental. The configuration was too precise to be the product of chance. Stonehenge, the AI concluded, had been engineered to affect the people standing inside it. This finding aligned closely with independent research that Trevor Cox and his team had already been conducting. In 2020, they completed what is considered the most detailed acoustic study of Stonehenge ever carried out. Because access to the actual monument is restricted, the team built a scale model accurate to a ratio of 1:12 using stones produced with 3D printing technology. They recreated the original configuration as precisely as the available archaeological records allowed, placed the model inside a purpose-built acoustic chamber, and ran hundreds of tests using voice recordings, musical instruments, and frequency sweeps across the full range of human hearing. The results were striking. Inside the stone circle, sound behaved in ways that had no parallel in the natural landscape of Neolithic Britain. Voices sounded fuller and more resonant than they would in an open field. Sound did not dissipate into the air. It was collected. When drums were played, the vibrations spread in all directions simultaneously, surrounding listeners rather than coming from a single source. Cox described the experience as something close to an immersive wall of sound. But the detail that caught the team most off guard was the complete absence of echoes. In a structure surrounded by large stone surfaces, echoes would normally be expected. The inner stones, however, disrupted the sound waves coming off the outer ring in such a way that sharp reflections were eliminated entirely. The acoustic environment inside the circle was clean, controlled, and contained. As Cox and his colleagues pointed out, that kind of result does not happen by accident. It is the product of deliberate design. Rupert Till extended this research by looking specifically at the bluestones from Wales. What he found added another layer to the picture. Some of the bluestones produce a distinct metallic ringing sound when struck. Not a dull thud as most rocks produce, but a clear bell-like tone. The region in Wales where these particular stones were quarried is known in Welsh as Carn Menyn, a name that translates loosely as the place of ringing stones. The Neolithic builders did not take the closest available stones. They did not take stones from 10 miles away or 20. They selected rocks from a site 150 miles distant because those rocks produced a specific sound. That decision alone implies a level of acoustic knowledge that is difficult to explain within the conventional picture of Neolithic society. Till also identified something in his research that he was initially cautious about publishing. The arrangement of stones at Stonehenge produces low-frequency vibrations that fall below the threshold of conscious hearing. This phenomenon is known as infrasound. You do not hear infrasound in the normal sense. You experience it physically. The vibrations register in the chest, in the stomach, in the bones. The effect is not subtle. Laboratory research on infrasound exposure has documented a consistent set of responses in test subjects. People report a sudden, sourceless sense of dread, a feeling of pressure on the chest, chills, the distinct and persistent sensation of being watched by something that is not there. Some subjects describe seeing movement at the edges of their vision. Others experience a sharp, instinctive urge to leave the area, a kind of animal-level panic response that has no obvious rational trigger. In controlled settings, researchers have observed calm adults becoming visibly distressed within a matter of minutes, having been exposed to infrasound frequencies they were not even aware they were receiving. Beyond the physical responses, infrasound at specific frequencies has also been linked to increased emotional vulnerability and what researchers describe as heightened suggestibility. Rational thought is not impaired. A person exposed to infrasound can still reason and make decisions. But at the same time, the body is generating signals of extreme threat. Every instinct points toward the presence of something powerful, invisible, and dangerous. In that particular state of mind, a person becomes significantly more receptive to authority, to instruction, and to belief. When Cox explained the implications of these findings to journalists, the response in the room was notably subdued. The acoustic properties of Stonehenge, he said, were not an incidental byproduct of stacking large rocks in a circle. They were the point. The structure had been designed, whether consciously or through generations of accumulated knowledge, to generate a specific psychological state in the people who entered it. The AI had taken all of this data together and arrived at the same conclusion. Stonehenge was not a place of passive ceremony. It was a functioning system, built to do something to the human beings inside it. And the acoustics, as the research team would go on to discover, were only the first part of the picture. Consider for a moment what it would have meant to visit Stonehenge 5,000 years ago. You would have travelled for days, possibly weeks, on foot across open countryside with no roads and no landmarks beyond those passed down to you through spoken description. The journey itself would have been exhausting. By the time you arrived, you would have been physically depleted, likely hungry, and already in a heightened emotional state simply from the effort of getting there. The monument would have been spoken about your entire life, not as a tourist destination or a point of historical interest. but as a place of genuine power, a place where something happened to people, a place where the boundary between ordinary life and something larger felt thin. You would have entered the circle, perhaps at dusk, when the light was low and the stones cast long shadows across the grass, and almost immediately, something would have changed. A pressure in your chest that had no obvious cause, a vibration you could not locate or explain. The voices of whoever was leading the ceremony would not have reached you the way voices normally do, arriving from a single direction and fading as they passed. They would have surrounded you, filled the space around you, seemed to come from the stones themselves, from the ground, from somewhere just behind your own thoughts. Your heart rate would have increased. Your skin would have prickled. A wave of inexplicable anxiety would have moved through you, followed by something worse. A deep physical certainty that you were in the presence of something far beyond human scale. None of that would have been your imagination. The stones would have been doing it to you. This is the conclusion that the research, when taken together, points toward most directly. The builders of Stonehenge were not primitive architects with a taste for large rocks and open skies. Based on what the acoustic studies, the geological surveys, and the AI analysis collectively indicate, they were practitioners of something that sits at the intersection of engineering and psychology. They understood at some level how to use the physical environment to alter the internal state of a human being. And they built a permanent structure designed to deliver that alteration consistently, reliably, and on demand. The implications of that are difficult to sit with, because if Stonehenge was capable of manufacturing fear, dread, and emotional vulnerability in the people who entered it, then the question that follows is an uncomfortable one. Who was in a position to benefit from that? Ceremonies do not run themselves. Someone spoke inside the circle while others listened. Someone interpreted what the gods were demanding, what the land required, what the people owed. And whoever that person was, they were speaking into an acoustic environment specifically designed to make their voice feel as though it came from everywhere at once, while the listeners stood in a state of low-level biological panic that they had no framework to understand or resist. The sociological picture this suggests is one that researchers have been cautious about stating too directly, but the logic is not difficult to follow. A population that enters a space already conditioned by generations of stories about its power, then experiences genuine, physically overwhelming sensations they cannot explain, and then receives instruction from an authority figure whose voice seems to emanate from the stones and the air itself, is not a population in a position to be skeptical. The belief that follows is not the result of naivety or superstition. It is the result of a carefully constructed experience that bypassed rational evaluation entirely by working directly on the body. Whether the builders understood the neuroscience behind what they were doing is a separate question. What the evidence suggests is that they knew it worked, and that knowledge was built into the structure itself so that it would continue to work long after the individuals who designed it were gone. The question of where the stones came from adds a further dimension to this picture, and it is here that the AI analysis produced its most striking finding. The origins of the bluestones from Wales and the Sarsens from Marlborough Downs had already been established before the AI study began. Both were known quantities. Researchers had understood for some time that the bluestones were transported from the Preseli Hills, roughly 150 miles away, and that the Sarsens came from significantly closer, around 25 miles to the north. These distances were already considered remarkable given the available technology. Moving a stone weighing several tons across that kind of terrain without wheeled vehicles or metal tools represents a logistical achievement that modern engineers still find impressive. But when the AI processed the full mineral dataset from every stone at the site, it identified something that previous human analysis had not caught. The altar stone, one of the most significant individual stones in the monument, positioned at the geometric centre of the structure, did not match any known quarry in Wales. Its mineral composition was unlike anything else at the site. When the system compared its elemental profile against every recorded sandstone formation across Britain, there was only one match: the Orcadian Basin in northeastern Scotland. That is approximately 600 miles from Stonehenge. In late 2024, a research team led by Anthony Clark at Curtin University confirmed this finding using high-precision mass spectrometry. The analysis examined microscopic mineral grains preserved inside fragments of the altar stone. Some of those grains dated to between 1 and 2 billion years old. Others are around 450 million years old. That specific combination of mineral ages exists in only one geological formation on the British Isles, the ancient sandstone deposits of the Orcadian Basin in Scotland. The match was, according to the researchers involved, unmistakable. Dr. Robert Eichser of University College London, who has spent much of his career analysing the geological origins of Stonehenge's component stones, described the results as unprecedented. Moving a 6-ton block from northeastern Scotland to Wiltshire using Neolithic technology, he noted, borders on the logistically impossible. The distance alone is extraordinary, but the terrain involved makes it even more so. Professor Chris Kirkland, who worked on the Curtin University study, outlined what the most likely transport route would have looked like. The builders almost certainly used marine transport. The stone would have been moved by boat, guided along hundreds of kilometres of coastline, navigating around headlands where currents run fast and unpredictable, timing departures to coincide with tidal windows that in some locations last only a matter of hours. The vessels available to Neolithic people were constructed from animal hides stretched over timber frames. Loading a 6-ton stone onto one of those in open water in the Atlantic, along a coastline with no sheltered harbours of the kind we would recognise today, required a level of seamanship and logistical planning that the standard narrative of Neolithic Britain has never really accounted for. One miscalculation in the timing, one unexpected shift in the weather or the current, and the stone and everyone aboard would have been lost. The fact that the stone arrived at all means the people responsible knew what they were doing. They understood tidal patterns, ocean currents, coastal geography, and the structural limits of the craft they were using. Kirkland stated plainly that he was very confident in the finding. The geological evidence, he said, leaves no other explanation. What this adds up to, when placed alongside everything else the research has established, is a picture of a civilization that was operating at a level of sophistication that mainstream accounts of Neolithic Britain have consistently underestimated. These were not scattered groups of farmers occasionally cooperating on building projects. The transportation of stones from 3 separate locations across the full length of Britain, each selected for specific and different properties, implies coordination, planning, and authority operating at a scale that goes well beyond anything resembling informal cooperation. The bluestones were chosen because they rang. The sarsens were chosen for their density and their durability. The altar stone was brought from 600 miles away for reasons that the data alone cannot fully resolve. But each choice was intentional. Each stone was a component, and the structure they formed together was not a monument in the decorative sense. It was a machine, assembled from parts sourced from across an entire nation, each one contributing something specific to the whole. The people who organized that process had to have possessed, at minimum, detailed knowledge of geology, acoustics, astronomy, and large-scale logistics. They had to have been capable of directing labor forces across multiple generations, maintaining the shadsias, consistency of a project that no single person would live to see completed. They had to have had a reason compelling enough to sustain that effort across centuries, a reason significant enough that ordinary people would spend their lives hauling stone across land and sea in service of something they may not have fully understood. What that reason was is something the research is still working toward, but the evidence gathered so far points in a direction that is hard to look away from. Whoever held authority at the center of this project understood something about the relationship between the physical environment and the human mind. They knew that a structure could be built that would make the people inside it feel things they had no way to explain or resist, and they used that knowledge to build something that would serve their purposes not for a decade or a generation, but for as long as the stones were standing. Which, it turns out, is a very long time. For decades, the astronomical dimension of Stonehenge was considered the part we had more or less figured out. The summer solstice sunrise aligns with the heel stone. The winter solstice sunset frames the central trilithons. These alignments are real, they are precise, and they have been verified repeatedly by researchers working across multiple disciplines. Every year, thousands of people gather at the site to watch the midsummer sun rise exactly where the builders intended it to rise. The assumption, reasonable enough on the surface, was that this solar geometry represented the primary purpose of the monument's orientation. The builders wanted to track the sun. They built accordingly, case more or less closed. The AI suggested otherwise. When the system cross-referenced the position of every stone against reconstructed star maps calculated for the sky as it appeared 5,000 years ago, it identified an alignment that had not previously been noted in the research literature. Not because it was hidden or subtle, in any technically complex sense, but because no one had thought to look for it in that particular direction. The alignment did not point toward a star. It did not track a planet or correspond to any constellation. It pointed toward a region of the night sky that contains, by every astronomical measure available, nothing at all. A patch of complete darkness. No light source of any significance falls within it. No celestial body of note passes through it. Dr. Giulio Magli, an archaeoastronomer at the Politecnico di Milano who has spent more than 30 years mapping celestial alignments in ancient monuments across 3 continents, reviewed the AI's methodology in detail. When he finished, he sat back and did not speak for nearly a minute. Then, he confirmed the finding. In 3 decades of work in this field, he said, he had not encountered anything like it. Every other major alignment at Stonehenge points at something. The solar events, the lunar positions, the extreme rising and setting, points of the moon across its full 18-year cycle. These are all real astronomical phenomena, and the monument tracks them with a degree of accuracy that continues to impress researchers working with modern instruments. But this alignment is different. The AI calculated that the probability of it being accidental was extremely low. The positioning was not approximate. It was not the result of a general orientation that happened to face a particular direction. It was precise and it was intentional. The builders aimed their structure at a specific point in the sky, and at that point, as far as current astronomy can determine, there is nothing there. The question that raises is one that researchers have found genuinely difficult to set aside. What were they pointing at? One possibility that Magli and others have raised is that the relevant event had not yet occurred when the stones were placed. The night sky is not static over the kind of timescales Stonehenge was built to operate. Across. Stars shift position relative to the Earth over thousands of years due to a phenomenon known as the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble in the Earth's rotational axis that causes the apparent position of stars to drift gradually over time. A region of sky that appears empty now may not have appeared empty 5,000 years ago, and equally, something the builders knew was coming may not have arrived yet from our current vantage point. Magli noted that the possibility Stonehenge was aimed at a future celestial event, rather than a contemporary one, is something the monument's geometry cannot rule out. The builders had demonstrated the capacity for long-range astronomical thinking. The entire structure is evidence of that. That capacity was confirmed again in 2024, when an event that researchers had been anticipating for nearly 2 decades finally took place. A major lunar standstill occurs approximately every 18.5 years when the moon reaches the most extreme positions on the horizon that it is capable of reaching within its full orbital cycle. The last major lunar standstill before 2024 had occurred before most of the current generation of researchers began working at the site. English Heritage organised an observation team for the event, and archaeoastronomers set up instruments within the stone circle as dusk settled over Salisbury Plain. Professor Clive Ruggles of the University of Leicester, one of the leading authorities in Britain on ancient astronomical practice, was present inside the circle as the moon moved toward its maximum position. He had spent years developing theories about how the monument would respond to this particular event. Standing there and watching it happen in real time was, by his own account, something he found difficult to put into words. The stones responded exactly as the builders had calculated they would. Lunar light tracked through the gaps and alignments in the monument with complete accuracy. Shadows fell precisely where the geometry of the structure predicted they would fall. Light entered where it was designed to enter. The monument, after 5,000 years of exposure to weather, human interference, and the slow erosion of time, executed its function without deviation. Ruggles later described it to colleagues as one of the most significant moments of his professional life. He had stood inside a structure built 50 centuries ago and watched it perform, in real time, exactly what it was built to do. That observation matters beyond its immediate drama, because it confirms something about the nature of Stonehenge that changes how every other finding in this research should be understood. This is not a ruin, it is not a remnant, it is a working instrument. The acoustics still function, the geology still holds, the astronomical alignments still engage with the sky at the moments they were designed to engage with it. Whatever it was built to do, it is still doing it. Which returns the question of who built it to the center of the picture. The conventional account of Stonehenge's construction has tended to emphasize community and cooperation. The image it presents is of separate tribal groups coming together around a shared project, contributing labor and materials voluntarily in service of a collective spiritual or ceremonial purpose. It is a comfortable narrative. It fits with a broader tendency to view prehistory through a relatively benign lens, to imagine ancient societies as simpler and more egalitarian than the complex, hierarchical civilizations that came after them. The AI's analysis does not support that picture. The mathematics of what Stonehenge required to be built make voluntary tribal cooperation an inadequate explanation. The project demanded centralized authority. It demanded a command structure capable of directing large numbers of people across multiple generations, maintaining consistency of purpose and design across a time span longer than any individual human life. The people who quarried stones in Wales did not decide independently to send them to Wiltshire. The people who loaded a 6-ton block of Scottish sandstone onto a hide boat on the northeastern coast of Britain did not do so on their own initiative. Someone told them to. Someone had the authority to make that instruction stick, across distances of hundreds of miles and across time periods measured in centuries. The stones themselves reflect this. The blue stones were not available locally. The altar stone came from the far end of the country. The Sarsens required enormous organised labour to move even across the relatively short distance from Marlborough Downs. None of these materials were contributed freely by neighbouring communities in a spirit of shared endeavour. They were extracted from specific locations because someone with sufficient power had decided they were needed. In the framework the AI's analysis suggests, these were not gifts between equals. They were the material expression of authority, of a ruling class with the knowledge, the reach, and the means to demand resources from populations across the full geographic extent of the British Isles. What is perhaps most striking about this picture is what is absent from it. There are no signs of large-scale organised violence in the archaeological record of this period. No evidence of fortifications built to repel military force. No mass graves consistent with battlefield casualties. No destruction layers in the settlements connected to Stonehenge's construction. The control that built this monument did not sustain itself primarily through the threat of physical force. It sustained itself through something more durable and more difficult to resist. If you had the ability to bring people into a structure that made them feel, physically and inescapably, that they were in the presence of something divine, something capable of destroying them, something whose demands were being relayed to them by the only person in the room whose voice carried the full acoustic weight of the stones behind it, you would not need an army. You would need the circle. The monument manufactured the psychological conditions under which authority became unquestionable, not through argument or threat, but through direct physical experience. The people who entered it did not choose to believe. Their bodies made the decision for them. That is the system the research, taken in its entirety, describes. A precision instrument built from carefully selected materials, sourced from across an entire nation, engineered to produce specific acoustic and psychological effects, oriented towards celestial events with a degree of accuracy that rivals modern observatories, and aimed with apparent deliberate intention at a point in the sky that remains, as of now, empty. 5,000 years have passed. The stones have weathered every season that time has sent across Salisbury Plain. Researchers have excavated, measured, modelled, and debated every aspect of the monument for more than a century. And the machine is still running, still tracking, still pointing at that patch of dark sky, waiting for whatever the builders considered important enough to spend centuries preparing for. What that is, the research has not yet determined. But the question is no longer whether Stonehenge was something more than a temple or a calendar. The evidence has moved well past that point. The question now is what exactly it was counting toward, and whether when that moment finally arrives, we will recognize it for what it is.